It started with the sound of a lock rattling. A sharp metallic click-click-click, echoing through the still morning air outside my cabin. For a second I thought maybe it was a raccoon, or the wind. But when I looked out through the thin curtain I saw her, the HOA president, Karen, red jacket, clipboard, sunglasses big enough to hide an entire attitude behind, and both her hands tugging, twisting, forcing the padlock on my front gate. I just stood there, barefoot on the cold wood floor, coffee cooling in my hand. She didn't even live on this side of the ridge, but ever since she'd become temporary acting chair of the Homeowners Association, she had decided that everyone's property was her playground. The sound of metal grinding against metal again. She cursed under her breath, then pulled out a set of keys. My gate wasn't even HOA issued. She must have thought every lock bowed to her. That's when I opened the door. The old hinges groaned loud, like the cabin itself didn't approve of early visitors. "Morning, Karen," I said. My voice came out calmer than I felt. "Something I can help you with?" She froze mid-twist, her lips pressed thin. "You weren't supposed to be here," she said, like I'd walked into her kitchen uninvited. I looked at her boots, brand new, spotless white. The gravel dust hadn't even touched them yet. "It's my property," I said softly. "Where else would I be?" Karen straightened, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "This cabin violates HOA code, non-standard fencing, unauthorized structure. You were sent notices." I leaned against the doorframe. The air smelled like pine and old rain. Somewhere, a blue jay screamed like it wanted to be part of the argument. "I didn't get any notices," I said. She smiled, the kind of smile people use right before they do something cruel. "That's because I hand-delivered them to your gate, which clearly, you locked against me." There was a beat of silence between us, just the soft hum of insects, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her, someone so addicted to control that she didn't even hear how absurd she sounded. Then she took out her phone. "If you don't unlock this property right now, I'm calling the police." I laughed quietly. "You're calling the cops because I'm at my own house." "Because you're obstructing an HOA inspection," she snapped. Her thumb was already moving. "And when they get here, I'll make sure they know exactly what kind of person you're being." I said nothing. I just stepped back inside and shut the door, leaving her voice echoing through the wood. For 10 minutes I stood in silence. The cabin ticked softly as the morning sun warmed the walls. I could hear her packing outside, talking maybe to herself, maybe to the police. I didn't care. But when the faint sound of tires crunching over gravel reached my ears, my stomach tightened. 2 black and white cruisers rolled up behind her SUV. Through the thin curtain, I saw one of the officers, tall, maybe mid-40s, step out, hat low, hand resting near his holster. The other, younger, leaned against the car door, scribbling something. Karen pointed toward my cabin like she was presenting evidence. "There she is. She's refusing entry, possibly squatting or hiding modifications." The older cop nodded and started walking toward the gate. Karen followed, smirking like she'd just summoned justice herself. I opened the door before they could knock. "Good morning, officers." He paused, looked at me, then something in his expression shifted. His brows drew together, not in suspicion, in recognition. "Ma'am," he started, then took a small step back. His tone softened instantly. "Ma'am, are you?" He glanced at Karen, then back at me. "Madam Judge," he whispered. Karen froze. "What did you just call her?" But the officer's face had already gone pale. "Judge Evelyn Rowe," he said louder, as if saying the name might make sense of what he was seeing. "From District Court." I didn't answer, I just nodded once, slowly. The silence that followed was heavy, almost reverent. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. Karen's smirk faded like someone had erased it. "Judge," she repeated, her voice trembling for the first time that morning. "As in." The officer straightened. His tone was respectful now. "Ma'am, if I'd known, he stopped himself. "We got a call about a trespass complaint. You're the property owner. Yes, I said. My voice was steady again. And I'd like to file one myself against her. Karen's clipboard slipped from her hand, landing in the dust with a soft thud. The younger cop looked confused. The older one simply nodded, almost apologetic. Understood, ma'am. As they turned toward her, Karen started stammering, words tripping over each other. I didn't know I thought she was. I closed the gate quietly behind them. The latch clicked. And for the first time that morning, the sound didn't feel sharp or annoying. It felt final. Inside, I sat by the window with my coffee, finally cold, and watched as the same woman who had tried to break into my home now pleaded not to be escorted off my land. Sometimes, I thought, justice doesn't need a gavel. Sometimes, it just needs a little patience and the right morning. That evening, the ridge was quiet again. The kind of silence that feels earned, like the land itself exhales once the noise is gone. I sat on the porch swing, mug in hand, watching sunlight bleed through the pine trees until everything turned gold. The cops had left hours ago. Karen, too, though not before throwing one last glare sharp enough to cut glass. For a while, I thought that was the end of it. Just another HOA tantrum, handled and done. But I should have known better. See people like Karen, they don't retreat. They regroup. By the next morning, something felt off. My phone buzzed not once but 6 times in a row, unknown numbers. Then a new email, notice of violation, urgent HOA action required. I opened it. They were fining me for unauthorized structural modifications and non-compliance with community standards. Except here's the thing, my cabin isn't even part of their HOA. The property line runs 30 feet outside their jurisdiction. It's been that way for decades. My late husband and I made sure of it when we bought this place. Still, there it was, their logo, their tone, their arrogance. I sat there, rereading the email until my coffee went cold again. Then I smiled, not out of amusement, but disbelief. They really thought they could paper me into submission. A knock echoed against the wooden door, soft at first, then louder. I opened it slowly. A man stood there in a navy blazer, slick hair, and a smirk that didn't belong in the mountains. Good morning. I'm representing the Pine Ridge HOA Legal Committee. We need a moment of your time. He handed me an envelope before I could speak. Thick paper, expensive ink, pretension wrapped in formality. What's this? I asked. An official notice, he said smoothly. Failure to comply may result in property lien action. I raised an eyebrow. On a property outside your jurisdiction. He hesitated, just for a flicker of a second, then recovered his posture. Boundaries have been recently reviewed and adjusted. By whom? The board. I almost laughed. The board doesn't outrank the county recorder. He opened his mouth to argue, then froze when he saw the badge resting on the small side table beside me. Not a police badge, a federal judicial one. Heavy, silver, engraved. The kind no one mistakes. He blinked, then swallowed. You're. Yes, I said quietly. And I suggest you read your penal codes before threatening a federal judge with a fake lien. His confidence cracked clean down the middle. I apologize, ma'am. This must be a misunderstanding. Then clear it up, I said. Before this misunderstanding turns into something your bar association will have to explain. He nodded quickly, almost bowing, and backed off the porch like it was sacred ground. As his car disappeared down the dirt road, I leaned against the railing and exhaled slowly. The sun had climbed higher, but it didn't feel warm anymore, just sharp. Because in that moment, I realized Karen wasn't just acting out of spite. She was testing power. And people who test power never stop after one round. By sunset, I had confirmation. 3 neighbors called me that night, quiet voices, nervous tones. They'd each been reminded by the HOA that associating with me could lead to collective penalties. I could almost hear Karen's smug satisfaction in their words. Divide and isolate, classic control tactic. But what she didn't know was that isolation never frightened me. It focused me. I'd spent 20 years sitting in courtrooms, listening to lies crumble under evidence. I'd watched people use rules like weapons, hoping no one would call their bluff. Karen was just another one of them. The next morning, I drove into town, not to the courthouse, not yet, but to the little diner that had served the Ridge for 50 years. The kind of place where coffee came with gossip and loyalty. When I walked in, the chatter dimmed. A few glances met mine, cautious, curious. Word had clearly spread. Marla, the owner, wiped her hands on a towel and leaned across the counter. Heard you had a morning show up there with Karen, she said. Something like that, I replied. She smiled wryly. That woman's been itching for drama ever since her husband lost that election. Now she treats the HOA like it's Congress. I chuckled softly. Well, she's about to get her hearing, just not the kind she expects. Marla poured me another coffee. You always play long game, Judge. Sometimes, I said. Sometimes the long game's the only one that works. Outside, wind scraped through the pines again. A storm was coming, both in the sky and in paperwork. By afternoon, I'd printed every deed, every boundary map, every municipal code that proved my cabin sat on private, non-HOA land. I mailed certified copies to the county office, the sheriff's department, and just for effect to the HOA's own mailing address. But I didn't stop there. I added a cover letter, calm, polite, sharp enough to draw blood. Further unauthorized entry or false representation of jurisdiction will be treated as trespassing and harassment, it said. Consider this your legal notice. I signed it the same way I signed every ruling for the last 15 years. Hun, Evelyn Rowe. 2 days later, I got another visit. Not from Karen. From the same officer who had whispered my name that morning. He pulled up the gravel road in an unmarked truck this time, stepped out with a small smile, and tipped his hat. Judge, he said, mind if I have a word? Of course, I said, motioning toward the porch. He sat, glancing at the woods like he didn't quite trust they were empty. You made quite an impression last week. I didn't plan to, I replied. I just wanted peace. He nodded slowly. I figured, that's why I'm here. There's talk in town the HOA's looking to escalate, maybe file an injunction. They've got connections, but not clean ones. Something inside me hardened, meaning. He sighed, meaning Karen's brother sits on the zoning board, and he's got a grudge against the county for denying their development permit last year. I looked out over the ridge, the valley spread beneath, quiet, fragile. They weren't just coming for me. They were trying to rewrite the rules to get what they wanted. I appreciate the warning, officer, I said. He stood, nodded once. Just be careful, ma'am. You've got more power than they realize, and that scares people like them. When he left, the last sliver of sunlight dipped below the trees. The wind picked up, carrying the faint rattle of the old gate again. For the first time since this all began, I didn't feel angry. I felt ready. Because when you've spent your life defending the law, and then watch people twist it for greed, you stop waiting for justice. You become it. And this time, I wasn't going to let anyone hide behind a clipboard or a fake ordinance. This time, the judge was off the bench and standing on her own porch. The next morning started gray. The kind of gray that feels like the world's holding its breath before something breaks. A low mist crawled between the pines, wrapping the cabin in quiet uncertainty. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, but it tasted different, not bitter, just heavy. Something in the air told me peace wouldn't last long. By noon, I was right. An envelope slid under my gate. Thick paper again, same logo, but this time stamped immediate action required. I picked it up slowly. The edges were damp from the fog, ink slightly bleeding, like the words themselves couldn't hold together. Inside was a new accusation: unauthorized septic expansion, subject to zoning review and fines. I actually laughed, a small, disbelieving sound that echoed across the yard. I hadn't touched my septic system in over a decade. They were grasping now, manufacturing reasons to drag me back under their thumb. But the letter wasn't about sewage or boundaries. It was about pressure. They wanted me tired, irritated, compliant. They wanted me to quit. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the others on my kitchen counter, a growing pile of petty intimidation. Then I grabbed my coat. If they wanted to play the zoning game, fine. I'd play it better. The county office sat in a low beige building off Main Street, tucked between the post office and a thrift store. Inside, it smelled faintly of paper and printer ink, familiar, bureaucratic comfort. The clerk behind the desk looked up and smiled politely. "Afternoon, ma'am. How can I help?" I handed her the envelope. "This came from the Pine Ridge HOA. They claim the zoning board is pursuing an inspection order. Can you verify that?" She typed for a moment, her nails clacking softly against the keyboard. Then she frowned. "There's no active order here under your property ID. Nothing at all." I nodded. "Could you check if there's been a request filed?" She scrolled again, then leaned closer to the screen. "Actually, there was a submission 2 days ago, denied within hours. It came from," she hesitated, lowering her voice, "a Mr. Daniel Greer. That name sound familiar?" "Karen's brother." I took a slow breath, careful not to let it turn into anger. "Yes," I said quietly, "it does." The clerk's eyes softened, reading the exhaustion behind my calm. "Would you like an official copy of the denial?" Please." She printed the document, stamped and signed. As I took it, I noticed something scribbled on the corner of her notepad, a small doodle of a cabin, surrounded by pine trees. Maybe coincidence, maybe not. "Thank you," I said. Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "You're not the first person they've gone after, Judge, but you might be the first who stands a chance." Her words stayed with me all the way back up the ridge. By the time I reached home, the sun was low again, painting the woods in long stripes of amber and shadow. My boots left faint prints in the damp soil, and at the gate, there it was again, the faint sound of someone watching. I stopped. The woods behind my fence rustled, then went still. "Karen," I said quietly, "if you're there, you should go home." Silence, then the faint crunch of footsteps fading downhill. It wasn't fear that followed me inside. It was focus. Because now, I had proof she wasn't just meddling. She was using family connections to manipulate county systems. And that's when I realized something else. This wasn't just my fight anymore. So that night, I wrote letters. Not angry rants, records. Each one addressed to a different oversight body. The County Ethics Committee, the Zoning Review Board, the HOA's own state-level regulatory office. I attached every piece of evidence, the fake notices, the denied request, even the timestamps showing how fast it had been pushed through. By midnight, the stack was sealed, stamped, and ready. When you've spent years behind the bench, you learn one thing about bullies: they thrive on silence. The moment you shine light on them, they scatter. The next day, I drove into town early. The morning air was sharp enough to wake bones. I stopped at the diner again, same seat, same mug. Marla raised an eyebrow. "You look like someone about to drop a hammer." I smiled faintly. Let's just say the paperwork, about to speak louder than their gossip. She laughed softly. "That's the Evelyn I remember." I looked out the window, where a black SUV had just parked across the street. Karen stepped out, a crisp suit, phone in hand. She didn't see me, but her posture screamed victory. She headed straight for the county building. I watched her disappear inside, knowing she'd find the same answer I already had: denial. But she wouldn't stop there. She'd twist it, shout, demand. Sure enough, 20 minutes later, she stormed out again, face red, movements sharp, like she'd bitten into her own anger. She got into her SUV and slammed the door hard enough to make the glass tremble. Marla shook her head. "Storm's coming," she murmured. "Let it," I said quietly. "I'm not running for cover anymore." That evening, as rain began to fall, I heard it, tires on gravel again. But this time it wasn't cops. It was delivery, certified mail, 3 envelopes thick. Inside the first, a formal acknowledgement from the State Housing Authority. They'd received my report and opened an investigation. Inside the second, confirmation that the County Ethics Board had scheduled a review hearing. Inside the third, a personal note from the zoning chair. It read simply, "Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We've had concerns about Mr. Greer's conduct for some time. We'll handle this appropriately." I sat there for a moment, listening to the rain drum against the roof, steady, rhythmic, almost like applause. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in handcuffs or headlines. Sometimes it comes quietly, in black ink and official seals. But still, part of me couldn't relax, because people like Karen, they don't crumble easily. When cornered, they lash out. And sure enough, the next morning, my phone buzzed again. A new number, a new threat. "Judge or not," the message said, "you'll regret crossing us." For a long moment, I just stared at the words. Then I smiled, not out of fear, but out of certainty. Because the thing about threats is, they only work if you're not ready to face them. And this time, I was more than ready. The storm outside had finally broken, wind roaring through the trees. But inside, I felt calm, almost serene. The fight was coming to my doorstep again. Only now, the ground beneath it belonged entirely to me. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. It came down in slow, steady sheets, the kind that turn dirt roads into rivers and make the forest smell alive. I spent those hours reading through my old case files, not because I missed the bench, but because the discipline calmed me. The sound of paper, the logic of evidence, the weight of truth. Those things still made sense, even when people didn't. But on the third morning, I heard something different, a low rumble outside. Not thunder, engines. I moved to the window and parted the curtain. 3 trucks, big, gray, official-looking, each one stamped with HOA property maintenance. Except there was no such department, not in Pine Ridge. Men in orange vests climbed out, carrying clipboards and power tools. One of them started walking toward the fence. The air felt heavier suddenly, like the kind of stillness right before a verdict is read. I stepped onto the porch. "Can I help you?" The man at the front, tall, with a thick beard and a nervous expression, turned toward me. "We've got orders to inspect and remove non-compliant structures," he said. "From who?" "HOA Board of Compliance." I took a slow breath. That board doesn't have jurisdiction here. He shifted awkwardly. "Ma'am, I don't want trouble. We were just told to clear anything outside regulation." Behind him, another man was already unlatching the gate. I felt something tighten inside me, not fear, not yet, just resolve. "Touch that gate," I said softly, "and you'll be trespassing on private property. You understand that?" He hesitated, then glanced toward the road. Karen's SUV sat parked at the end of the drive, engine running, window down, her sunglasses glinting even in the cloudy light. She raised her phone, filming. It clicked then. She wanted confrontation, wanted footage she could twist into her next accusation. "Back away from the fence," I said again. The man looked between me and her. He didn't move. Fine, if they wanted a show, I'd give them one. I took out my phone, opened the camera, and walked straight to the gate. The gravel crunched beneath my boots, loud enough to cut through the rain. I angled the phone toward the trucks, making sure to capture their logos and faces. "This is Judge Evelyn Rowe," I said clearly. "I am recording an unauthorized attempt by the Pine Ridge HOA to enter private land outside their jurisdiction. You are being documented." The men froze. Even Karen's car door creaked open, hesitation leaking through her confidence. Then one of the workers stepped back. "Ma'am, we didn't know," he said quickly. "We were just hired for the day." "Then, I suggest you leave before you're part of something criminal." Within seconds, tools dropped, engines roared, and the trucks began backing down the road. Karen stepped out, slamming her door hard. "You can't threaten contractors, Evelyn," she shouted. "You'll regret this." I met her eyes across the rain-slick gravel. "You already made that promise once." Her jaw tightened. "You think your title protects you?" "No," I said, "but truth does." She laughed, sharp, hollow. "Let's see if it still does when the cameras are watching." And just like that, she raised her phone again, pointing it at me. "This woman is obstructing official HOA maintenance. You're all witnesses," she said, turning to her empty entourage of trees and puddles. The performance would have been almost funny if it wasn't so desperate. "Karen," I said softly, stepping closer, "you're recording a lie, and you know it." Her fingers trembled just slightly around the phone. She wanted power, but she was losing grip on control. I stopped a few feet away, rain dripping from the brim of my coat. "You don't have to keep digging this hole," I said. "Just stop, before you destroy more than your own reputation." For a heartbeat, something flickered in her eyes, uncertainty, maybe. Then pride smothered it. "Save your judge talk," she hissed. "You think rules matter when people like me write them." I looked at her for a long second. "No," I said quietly. "People like you just forget they can be rewritten." She turned sharply, got back into her SUV, and sped off, tires spinning mud across the road. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was charged, heavy, the kind that stays long after the sound fades. I went back inside, wiped my boots, and poured another cup of coffee. The rain had finally started to ease. That evening, the officer, the same one who'd warned me before, came by again. No uniform this time, just a flannel shirt and concern in his eyes. "Heard there was trouble up here," he said. "Depends on your definition of trouble," I replied. "They sent fake maintenance crews. I sent them home." He nodded slowly. "Karen filed a complaint already, claims you obstructed community safety work." I smiled faintly. Did she mention her men trespassing on private land? She left that part out. We both sat down on the porch, listening to the last drops of rain fall from the eaves. "Truth is," he said quietly, "folks like her don't stop until someone bigger steps in. Then maybe it's time someone did." He studied me for a moment. "You going to make it official?" I nodded. "Not yet. I'm giving them one last chance to see what integrity looks like before they bury theirs." He smiled a little. "Remind me never to end up on your bad side, Judge." I laughed softly. "It's not a bad side, it's just the side that keeps receipts." That night, I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and began drafting something different. Not a letter, not a complaint. A statement. A clear, factual record of every act of harassment, manipulation, and boundary violation. With timestamps, emails, names. The kind of document that didn't shout, it spoke. When I finished, I saved it in 3 places: local, cloud, and print. Old habits die hard. As I leaned back, I caught my reflection in the dark window. The same woman who once wore robes and wielded a gavel now sat alone in a mountain cabin, defending her peace with words and patience instead of court orders. And yet it felt right, honest. Because maybe that's what justice really was, not something handed down from a bench, but something you built, one truth at a time, even when no one's watching. Outside, an owl called once, a slow, haunting sound. The storm had passed, but something deeper was still brewing on the horizon. Karen wouldn't let this go quietly. And neither would I. By the next week, the rain had stopped, but tension hadn't. You could feel it even in town, whispers traveling faster than the wind. At the diner, conversations stopped when I walked in. At the grocery store, people pretended not to stare, pretending to check labels they'd never buy. Karen's work. She started her campaign, digital flyers, local posts, half-truths shared in community update threads. HOA judge refuses inspection, one read. Unregistered cabin may violate safety codes, said another. Each line soaked in that same poison accusation dressed as concern. I ignored it at first. You can't fight lies by repeating them. But then one morning, a formal notice arrived. All homeowners are invited to the quarterly HOA meeting. Mandatory attendance, recommended for community matters. And at the bottom, in bold, topic, the row property and noncompliance concerns. They wanted me there. They wanted a show. So I went. The meeting was held in the community hall, a wooden building that smelled faintly of polish and pride. Folding chairs in neat rows, a podium at the front, and a large banner that read Pine Ridge HOA, for a better tomorrow. Karen stood near the front, surrounded by board members who looked more like a jury than neighbors. Her hair perfect, her smile sharp. She spotted me and straightened, as if the main act had arrived. People turned as I entered. Some faces curious, others uneasy. A few nodded in quiet respect, most didn't know which side they were allowed to be on. I took a seat in the back, setting my folder on my lap. The sound of metal chairs squeaking echoed faintly. Karen began. Good evening, everyone, she said, voice syrupy sweet. Before we move to agenda items, we have an important issue to discuss: property compliance and community safety. She paused dramatically, scanning the room. As many of you know, one property in our district has repeatedly ignored regulations, inspections, and HOA standards. Murmurs rippled through the hall. Karen continued, projecting false sincerity. We value fairness, of course, but we also can't let exceptions endanger the rest of us. She turned, eyes locking onto me. Mrs. Rowe, would you like to say anything before we proceed? I stood slowly. It's Judge Rowe, I said, my tone calm. And yes, I do. Every head turned. Karen smirked, probably expecting me to sound defensive or emotional. But I'd spent years mastering silence, and silence, when used right, can crush arrogance louder than any shout. I walked to the front, each step steady. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath my boots. I could smell faint varnish and nerves. First, I said, setting the folder on the podium, thank you for inviting me. It's not often I get to witness democracy, or whatever this is. A few quiet laughs rippled from the back. Karen stiffened. Second, I'd continued, let's talk about jurisdiction. I opened the folder, revealing copies of county maps, court-certified. The HOA seal on one side, my property boundary on the other, and the clear line that separated them. This, I said, tapping the map, is the official Pine Ridge boundary. My cabin sits 32 feet beyond it, meaning your association holds no legal authority here. None. A quiet gasp went through the room. Someone in the back whispered, wait, she's not under HOA. Karen flushed. That's disputed, she said quickly. Boundaries were confirmed last month by the county zoning office. I cut in. I have their statement right here. I held up the document, the official seal glinting under fluorescent light. And by the way, your brother's request to alter those boundaries, denied, in writing. Her jaw tightened, color rising in her cheeks. I also have records. I continued, flipping another page, of unauthorized property entry, falsified notices, and a staged inspection attempt on private land, all documented, dated, and reported. The room had gone completely still now. Even the air conditioner seemed to hesitate. Karen tried to speak, but I raised a hand slightly, not rude, just firm. Please, I've let you finish every sentence you've wanted for weeks. You can let me have this one. Her lips pressed shut. I turned to the audience. You all moved here for peace, for safety, for community, but peace doesn't come from control, it comes from respect. And when that's gone, when one person starts believing they are the law. I let the silence hang, long enough for the words to settle. You stop having a neighborhood, you start having a regime. For a heartbeat, the room said nothing. Then, from the second row, someone clapped once, then again. And then others followed, hesitant at first, then stronger. Karen's expression cracked. The sound of approval she couldn't control hit her harder than anything I could have said. I didn't gloat, I simply gathered my folder. I'm done here, I said quietly. But before I go, consider this. Leadership isn't about power, it's about protection. And the moment you forget that, you lose both. I turned and walked toward the exit. No hurry, just steady steps echoing through the wood hall. Outside, the evening was cool, the sky painted with streaks of orange and purple. The sound of distant applause still carried faintly through the open door. As I reached my car, I heard a voice behind me. Judge Rowe. It was one of the board members, an older man, gray hair, kind eyes. He walked up slowly. I just wanted to say thank you. I think some of us forgot why we joined in the first place. I nodded. It happens, just make sure it doesn't again. He smiled sadly. You gave everyone a lot to think about tonight. Good, I said softly. Thinking is where justice begins. As I drove back up the ridge, the pines swayed gently in the wind. For the first time in weeks, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. But peace never lasts long when pride's been bruised. Because later that night, my porch light flickered twice, once, then again, before going completely dark. Outside, somewhere in the woods, a car door shut quietly. And just like that, the calm I'd fought so hard to earn slipped into shadow again. Sometimes, silence isn't peace. Sometimes, it's a warning. The wind carried that eerie kind of stillness that only exists after confrontation, not peace, but pause. The kind that holds its breath, waiting for the next move. That night, I sat by the cabin window, a cup of tea cooling in my hands. Outside, the forest was black velvet, broken only by the faint silver of moonlight spilling over the pines. Somewhere deep in the trees, a branch cracked, sharp, sudden, too deliberate to be wind. I set the cup down. The silence afterward was too perfect. Then the porch light flickered again, twice. I exhaled slowly. So this is how far you'll go, I whispered. I reached for the flashlight by the door, its metal cold in my palm. The floorboards under my boots creaked softly as I stepped out. The air smelled like wet bark and dirt, clean, but heavy with something unsaid. The beam of light swept across the yard, over the empty rocking chair, the gravel path, the half-rusted gate. Everything looked ordinary. That was the unnerving part. I walked toward the gate, my breath visible in the cool air. My flashlight caught a glint of something on the post, a small, black screw drilled just above the latch. I leaned closer. A micro camera. I stared at it for a long second. My fingers itched to rip it out, but I didn't. Instead, I smiled faintly and whispered, "Keep watching." Then turned and went back inside. Inside, I went straight to the desk and pulled out my recorder, a small digital one I used in court to dictate notes. I turned it on. Entry 11:42 p.m. Confirming evidence of surveillance device installed without consent. My voice sounded calm, detached, like it wasn't happening to me. But my pulse told a different story. The next morning, the forest woke before I did, birds chirping, wind rattling the shutters. For a brief, deceptive moment, everything felt normal. Until I saw the tracks in the dirt driveway. Tire marks. Fresh. I knelt down. The pattern was narrow, probably a small SUV. Not many of those came up the ridge. Karen drove one. I sighed quietly. You're predictable at least. By noon, I was sitting at the county office, handing a flash drive across the counter. The clerk, a soft-spoken woman named Lena, looked confused when she saw the footage. This is from your property. Outside my gate, I said. Unauthorized camera installation. I'd like to file it under harassment and unlawful surveillance. Lena nodded slowly. That's serious. It's meant to be, I said and left. On the drive back, my phone buzzed an unknown number. I almost ignored it but pressed answer. Mrs. Rowe, the voice said, low and clipped. Male, you're making this harder than it has to be. I didn't speak. Take down the complaint. Sign the compliance form and this ends quietly. You don't need to drag everyone through your pride. I leaned back, silent. The hum of the tires filled the pause. Then I said quietly, you called the wrong person. And hung up. I parked at the cabin just as the first drops of rain began to fall again, slow, deliberate, almost rhythmic. The smell of pine and wet soil filled the air. Inside, I locked the door and sat by the fireplace. The flicker of flame played across the wooden walls, turning everything gold and shadow. It's strange how memory works when you're alone. It brings you people you didn't invite. My husband's laugh. My father's old saying, power only tempts those afraid to earn respect. I hadn't thought about that in years. The wind howled once, long and hollow, pushing smoke back into the room. I got up, cracked the window open slightly, and that's when I saw it, a dark figure near the tree line. Still, watching. The kind of stillness that isn't natural. I didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. After a few seconds, the figure stepped back into the shadows, gone, as silently as it appeared. It wasn't fear that filled me. It was disappointment. Because I'd seen this before, not here, but in courtrooms, in corridors of power. The same desperate need to intimidate what you can't understand. That night, I barely slept. Every sound felt amplified, the ticking clock, the faint drip of rain, the soft groan of wood settling. Somewhere between waking and dream, I remembered something my clerk once said to me after a difficult trial. Justice isn't a hammer, ma'am. It's a mirror. You just have to make people look. And I realized that's what I had to do here. Not fight them, just make them see. The next morning, I put on my boots and drove down the mountain again. Not to the HOA office, not to the police, to the courthouse. The deputy at the front desk smiled when he saw me. Judge Rowe, haven't seen you in a while. Good morning, Daniel, I said softly. I'm here in a different capacity today. His smile faded when he saw the flash drive I handed over. This serious? Serious enough, I said. I'd like to request a formal restraining order against an HOA member and her affiliates. Grounds, harassment, trespass, and surveillance. He nodded, typing. You got witnesses? Not yet, I said, but I have proof and patience. That night when I got home, the woods were quieter than usual. Too quiet. I half expected another flicker, another sound in the dark. But instead, a single envelope sat on the porch, weighed down with a small stone. No stamp, no name. I opened it. Inside was a single sentence, printed in neat type. You think being a judge makes you untouchable. It doesn't. No signature. But I knew who wrote it. I folded the paper once, slid it back into the envelope, and tucked it inside my desk drawer. Then I opened my recorder again. Entry 10:09 p.m., I said. Received anonymous threat. Noted tone of fear disguised as warning. That's when you know they're losing control. I stopped the recording, looked out the window at the moonlit ridge, and whispered, "Keep coming." Because I wasn't hiding anymore. When people try to use fear to control you, the only real answer is calm. Not loud, not reactive calm. It terrifies them more than anything else. Sometimes, the strongest sound in the world is silence. By the end of that week, the rain came back, harder this time. Sheets of it. It pounded against the cabin roof like fists demanding attention. Every window blurred with running water, every sound drowned in its steady, merciless rhythm. I'd been expecting something, maybe a confrontation, maybe silence. But what came next was neither. It was a knock. 3 taps, firm, deliberate, almost polite. I opened the door slowly. Standing there was a man in uniform, a sheriff's deputy. Broad shoulders, serious eyes, rain dripping from his hat. "Evening, ma'am," he said. "Sorry to bother you so late." I nodded slightly. "You're not bothering me. Come in before you drown out there." He stepped inside, wiping his boots on the mat. The air smelled like rain and wet pine. He looked around the old cabin, the fireplace, the papers on the table. Then his gaze came back to me. "Judge Rowe," he said. I raised an eyebrow, "So you know." He nodded. "Sheriff told me to keep this quiet, said you're dealing with a neighborhood situation." "That's one way to put it," I said. He pulled a small folder from under his jacket. "We got your formal complaint, and your recordings. The county attorney's already reviewed them." He hesitated. "There's enough to open a harassment investigation." I watched his expression shift, curiosity laced with unease. "But I'm guessing there's something else," I said. He looked down. "Yes, ma'am, there's more." He opened the folder and slid out a printed screenshot, a photo of me taken from behind the pines. Grainy, night vision quality, my silhouette through the cabin window. "This was found on a local community group's admin account," he said. "We traced it back to the HOA president's login." Karen. My pulse didn't spike. My breath didn't quicken. It was the kind of calm you get when a storm finally shows its face after pretending to be wind. "I see," I said quietly. "Then I suppose it's time to stop pretending this is about property lines." He nodded slowly. "Sheriff's gonna serve her notice tomorrow. Wanted me to give you a heads up. There's gonna be noise about it." "There always is when truth arrives," I said. He gave a faint smile, tipping his hat before stepping back into the rain. "You take care, Judge." The door shut softly behind him, leaving only the sound of rain again, relentless, cleansing, real. I sat at the table, staring at the flickering firelight. Part of me wanted to feel relief, but that's not what came. What came was exhaustion. Because people like Karen don't crumble when they're caught, they lash out one last time before they do. And I could feel it coming. The next morning, it began. The HOA thread exploded, words like injustice, bias, revenge, posts twisting every fact, turning me into the villain in their little digital war. People I'd nodded to for months suddenly had opinions they'd never earned. But not everyone joined in. Some stayed quiet, some posted things like, "Let's wait for the facts." That's how truth starts, not with applause but hesitation. By afternoon, the sheriff's truck rolled down Pine Ridge Road. I watched from my porch as they stopped at the HOA office, Karen's command post. A deputy got out, holding an envelope. Karen was waiting at the door, umbrella in one hand, expression carved from ice. I couldn't hear the exchange, just saw the gestures, her sharp refusal, his patient insistence, her sudden realization that this wasn't a suggestion. When she finally took the envelope, her hand shook. The paper that once gave her power now carried her consequence. That night, I received an unexpected message. A woman from the neighborhood board, Donna. Soft voice, kind smile. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology. We let her run everything. We thought it was order, but it was fear. If you ever need anything, you've got my number. I stared at the message for a while before replying. Thank you, just make sure fear doesn't wear authority again. The next few days were quiet, unnervingly so. No knocks, no letters, no flickering lights. Just wind, birds, and the sound of time returning to its natural rhythm. Until Saturday morning. I was in the garden, trimming dead branches when I heard gravel crunching. A black sedan pulled up the drive. Not sheriff, not HOA, clean. Government issue clean. The door opened, and out stepped a tall man in a dark suit. His shoes hit the dirt with practiced precision. He smiled faintly. Judge Rowe. I sighed. You people always show up when the dust settles, don't you? He chuckled. Occupational habit. I'm from the state attorney's office. We've been reviewing multiple complaints tied to this HOA. Your submission helped connect a few dots. I raised an eyebrow. Criminal dots. He gave a subtle nod. Fraud, tampering, misuse of funds. It's not just your neighborhood, ma'am, it's bigger. For the first time in weeks, I let out a low, genuine laugh. Karma has a long memory. He smiled. That it does. When he left, the air felt lighter, as if the trees themselves had exhaled. The sound of birds returned, tentative but free. That evening, I took a slow walk down to the lake, the same path Karen once tried to block off. The water was still, the reflection perfect. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel watched. I sat on the old dock, listening to the frogs croak and the soft rustle of reeds. The smell of wet earth, the creak of wood under my boots, all the small, honest details that make peace feel real again. And in that quiet, I thought about everything that had happened. How quickly people can turn when power whispers in their ear, how fragile decency becomes when fear is rewarded. But I also thought about balance. Justice isn't vengeance. It's clarity. It's standing still while chaos burns itself out around you. Sometimes you don't have to destroy your enemies. You just have to outlast them. As the last light faded over the ridge, I whispered softly to no one in particular, let her learn. Because people like Karen always do, not from punishment, but from being forced to live without control. That's the real sentence. And when I finally stood to leave, I noticed something new, a small white flower, growing through the cracks of the dock. Uninvited, unafraid. Life, reclaiming what was always meant to be free. The following Monday morning started with an unusual stillness, the kind that doesn't warn of a storm, but of a reckoning. The mist hung low over Pine Ridge, curling around the cabins like breath from something ancient. The sound of tires on gravel carried far in that kind of quiet, and when I heard it, I already knew who it was. Karen's voice broke the stillness first, loud, sharp, carrying more panic than control. You can't do this. I've built this place from the ground up. I stepped outside just as two county officers escorted her toward a waiting vehicle. A small crowd of neighbors stood scattered along the road, some whispering, some simply watching. No one intervened. It wasn't triumph that I felt, just gravity. When the door shut behind her, the silence she left behind felt heavier than her noise ever did. The sheriff, the same deputy who'd visited days earlier, approached me with a nod. Ma'am, it's done. I looked past him toward the pines swaying in the distance. Nothing's ever really done, I said softly, but this part is. He hesitated before saying, the board's been dissolved for now. State's taking over the investigation. Misuse of community funds, false filings, the works. Turns out, your cabin wasn't the only property she tried to claim. I let that sink in, then simply said, she wanted control, and when she lost it, she turned it into chaos. He nodded, you're not wrong. The crowd slowly dispersed, leaving only the soft hum of cicadas and the creak of wind through old wood. I walked back toward my porch, each step steady, deliberate. My boots pressed into the wet ground, leaving clear prints behind. For the first time in months, I unlocked the gate without looking over my shoulder. The hinges didn't squeal this time, they just opened. Inside, the cabin was filled with morning light. Dust floated through the beams like tiny, aimless ghosts, reminders of stillness. I sat at the table and poured myself a cup of coffee. The smell alone felt like closure. Outside, birds had returned to the feeders. The world was, in its quiet way, moving on. But the mind doesn't always let go as easily as the world does. That afternoon, I walked down to the old community hall, now locked and taped off, the HOA banner half torn, flapping in the breeze. The sign that once read, "For a better tomorrow," now just read, "For a better," the last word missing, maybe fittingly so. I ran my hand along the wood siding. It was warm from the sun, imperfect, human. Donna, the board member who'd messaged me before, pulled up in her small hatchback. She stepped out, smiling carefully. "It's strange seeing it this quiet," she said. "Peace always feels strange after too much noise," I replied. She nodded. "They're forming a new committee, volunteers only. No titles, no presidents, just neighbors again." "That's how it should have been all along." She hesitated. "Would you consider joining?" I smiled faintly. "No, Donna, my time making rules ended long ago. Now I just enjoy watching people follow their better ones." She looked relieved, maybe even a little inspired. "You know," she said softly, "some of us forgot who you really were until the deputy said it out loud. Madam Judge. It made sense then, the calm, the silence, the way you never shouted back." I looked out toward the ridge, the trees waving like quiet witnesses. "It's not about being a judge," I said. "It's about knowing when not to be one." Because the truth was, I hadn't hidden my identity to feel powerful. I'd done it to feel ordinary again. To remember what justice looked like when no one was forced to listen. A week passed. The lake reflected summer light now, clear and still. The air smelled cleaner. Then one morning, I received a letter. Not official, not typed, handwritten. It was from Karen. "I don't expect forgiveness," it read. "I don't even know why I'm writing this. Maybe to say, you were right, I thought control meant safety, but it just made me smaller. You didn't humiliate me, I did that to myself. You saw it before I did." The signature was shaky, probably written in custody. I folded the letter and set it in my desk drawer beside the first one, the one that had threatened me. Two pieces of paper, two very different voices, both from the same person. And I realized something. Some people are sentenced by a courtroom, others are sentenced by realization. That night, the stars came out, clearer than they'd been all season. I sat on the porch, the gate creaking once in the soft wind. The sound that used to make me uneasy now made me smile. Peace doesn't always arrive with silence. Sometimes it comes disguised as a creak, a sigh, a single breeze reminding you that you're still here. I closed my eyes and thought of everything that had happened, the lies, the fear, the power games, the slow reclaiming of truth. And for the first time, I felt something deeper than satisfaction. I felt release. Because justice, real justice, isn't about winning, it's about balance, about teaching the world that truth doesn't shout, it waits. In the end, Karen's story faded the way all noise does quickly, but the lesson she left behind lingered. Never mistake control for respect. And never confuse silence with weakness. Sometimes, the ones who speak least carry the most weight. Sometimes, the ones who walk away quietly are the ones who have already won. As the wind brushed past my face, I whispered the last words I ever said about the whole ordeal, not to anyone, just to the air, to the trees, to myself. Justice served, dignity kept. The gate swung gently on its hinge, like it agreed. And somewhere beyond the ridge, morning began again, slow, golden, honest. Every HOA has a story on HOA headaches. You'll hear the ones they tried to bury. Subscribe today.